Hi, everybody. Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Giada Guerra will defend the academic thesis, the contribution of auditory attention to reading process in school-age children with and without dyslexia. So may I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Dear committee, colleagues, family and friends, thank you for being here today. I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk about the work I've done in the last few years for my project. The goal here was understanding whether auditory attention is one of the many factors contributing to the large individual differences in reading skills that we observe in children, between and across children with and without dyslexia. So at first, we may wonder why auditory attention should play a role in reading, especially because we tend to think of reading as primarily a visual activity. However, reading is a very complex skill to acquire, although we might have forgot about it by now, and it requires the involvement and the coordination of different processes. So following this, there are several potential pathways linking attention and reading in children, and I examine only some of them in my work. So first, learning to read requires focusing attention to the structural features of language. So attentional mechanism, but especially selective attentional mechanism, may be needed for successful phonological awareness development, and also for being able to integrate and associate phonological and orthographic inputs. We also know that this skill, the learning of letter-speech sound association, is crucial for reading development, and is also thought to be closely related to reading fluency deficits in dyslexic readers. We also know that dyslexic readers show some attentional deficit, both in the visual and auditory modality, at different level, either subclinical or clinical level. And at the end of the continuum, we find a high comorbidity rate with ADHD, particularly with the inattentive subtype. Another reason why we think it's important to look into auditory attention skills in dyslexic readers is their difficulty in perceiving speech when acoustic conditions are not ideal. So for example, when speech or noise are in the background. But having good attentional skill may not just support children when they start learning to read, but also later on. When a child is diagnosed with dyslexia and receive an intervention for dyslexia to improve their reading skills and reading specific skills. So having great attentional skills may allow children to benefit more for an intervention for dyslexia, because they're required to focus for a long period of time on visual and auditory inputs. And finally, we should remember that children read and learn to read in environments that are very different from our pristine lab conditions. So in environment that can be cluttered and noisy. So another element taken into account in this project was the one of auditory destruction. So in particular, we look into background speech and at the effect the background speech has on reading skills and whether auditory attention modulates these potential negative effects. So this was actually the focus of the first study, where I look at the effect of two properties of background speech, loudness and intelligibility on both reading speed and reading comprehension of narrative texts. And what we found is that loudness had a specific effect on reading speed. So children tended to slow down more when louder background speech, when they were listening to louder background speech. On the other hand, we found that intelligibility of background speech had a specific effect on reading comprehension. So the quality of text understanding decreased when they were listening to Dutch speech that was intelligible for them, compared to when they were listening to Hungarian that was unintelligible. And what we also found is that a component of auditory attention, so interference control, which is the ability of suppressing irrelevant information, in this case in the auditory modality, modulated this intelligibility effect on comprehension. So it's possible that children with better interference control are more able to suppress the automatic semantic processes generated by meaningful background speech. In the second study, instead, I focus on identified auditory attentional deficit in children with dyslexia. And to do that, we use a task that have both a selective attention and a sustained attention component. So children were listening to two melodies presented simultaneously. A high pitch one that you see here in red and a low pitch one that you see here in blue. And what we asked children to do was to focus their attention just on one of the two melodies, to sustain their attention there over time, and to detect triplets repetitions within the attended melody, such as the one that you see here in the green square. So first I look at the neural effect of directing attention to a target stream. And what I found is that as compared to when kids were simply listening passively to the same type of stimuli, phase coherence increase in frontocentral channel. So phase coherence at 3 Hertz, that was the presentation rate of the attended stream. So this tells us that the timing of neural activity aligns with the timing of the attended sound, so the sound that they were paying attention to. And also what we found is that that this increase in phase coherence at 3 Hertz was significantly correlated with task performance. So kids with a larger increase were more able to detect these triplets repetitions. I then look at this, I then compare these attentional and EEG metrics between children with and without dyslexia. And we did not find any difference at the behavioral level or in the EEG metrics. By looking at the topographic maps that I'm presenting here, it actually looks like that there's a difference between groups. However, and indeed we found a trend at some electrodes, but this trend did not reach any significance. But what I also found is that the behavioral measure of attention predicted both speech-in-speech perception abilities and also reading fluency abilities. And both these skills were impaired in children with dyslexia. So here we provided some evidence of the fact that auditory attention is one of the factors contributing to both speech and noise perception deficit and reading fluency deficit in dyslexic readers. Then in the study described in chapter 4 focus on a crucial process for reading development, which is the learning of letter-speech sound associations. So the goal here was first to develop a child-friendly behavioral tool that was able to capture deficit in dyslexic readers in this domain, and also to understand whether auditory attention predicts the individual ability of children of learning these correspondences. So what we asked children to do was to learn novel symbol and speech sound associations. So in the first part of the task, they were presented with 2 symbols and a sound, and they have to identify which symbol matched the sound. And in the very last part of the task, they were presented with a symbol, then with a sound, and they have to tell us whether the presented sound matched the symbol. And what we found is that just after a very short practice, 6-8 minutes, the performance of children with dyslexia start diverging from the one of typical readers. So you see here in red that the dyslexic readers have shallower learning curves. And what we also found is that both selective and sustained attention, and which is the measure that I presented in the previous study, and interference control predicted the individual ability of children of learning these associations. So these tell us that children with better auditory attention may be more able to focus their attention on the characteristics of the audiovisual pair, or they are better able to sustain their attention throughout the training, and this has a general benefits for learning. And finally, the last study was an exploratory one. And here we wanted to identify predictors of individual outcomes from an intervention for dyslexia. This is because at the moment, we have very limited knowledge of why some children benefit more from the same intervention than others. So the sample was a subgroup of children that participated in the previous studies and that receive an intervention at the regional Institute for Dyslexia that was partner in this PhD project. And RID measured their spelling and reading fluency skills before intervention halfway, so after 6 months of intervention and then after 12 months, so at the end. And we first look at all the reading related skills and attentional skills that we took into account in the previous studies. And we look also at how they share variance among each other with a simple principal component analysis. And what we found is that 2 components were particularly interesting in predicting benefits from an intervention. So a component that we think indexed selective attention to phonological information predicted spelling growth during the first part of the intervention. That was more focused on developing accurate reading and also accurate knowledge of letter-speech sound correspondences. So it's possible that being able to direct attention to phonological unit by listening to speech allows children to develop better orthographic representations. And the second component was one indexing selective attention during audiovisual learning, and this predicted both spelling and reading fluency growth during the second part of the intervention. That was more focused on developing reading fluency and automatic knowledge of letter-speech sound correspondences. So to conclude, we saw that auditory attention is linked to children's reading skills in several ways. So first, attention modulates the harmful effect of background speech on reading skills and also on during speech perception, so also on listening tasks. So poor attention, especially in noisy environments, should be considered as a risk factor for learning. So these children might be less able to focus their attention on the teacher's voice, or they might be less able to extract information from the text that they are reading. We did not find group level attentional deficit in dyslexia, although their performance was in generally lower, and we also saw a trend in the EG metrics. So it's possible that attentional deficit only are characteristic of only some individuals with dyslexia, and they are only one of the many factors contributed to difficulties in dyslexia. So these again point to the high heterogeneity of dyslexic readers' profile. And but the fact that we saw that attention predicted a crucial skill for reading development, which is the learning of letter speech and association, suggests that maybe during early stages of reading acquisition, children with poorer attentional skills are less able to learn these associations, that these ultimately affect their reading skills. And finally, we saw that attention skills and reading specific skills interact, and this interaction actually predicts individual intervention benefits. This study, of course, had the limitation that it was not a randomized control trial, but perhaps it indicates that attention plays a role during intervention. And also given that the individual response to an intervention is normally considered as an indication of the severity of dyslexia, of impairment in dyslexia, it's possible then that poor attention is more a risk for more severe deficit rather than be just a risk for dyslexia per se. But of course, we need future studies to test the speculations. For example, a longitudinal study tracking the parallel development of attention and reading could be the suitable candidate to test causal links between attention and reading in children. So thank you for listening. I would like just to take the opportunity to thank the founders, so European Marie Curie fundings, universities, Birkbeck University in London and Maastricht University, the Regional Institute for Dyslexia, all the children, many children that participated in my studies, all the people that helped me testing. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible, and my supervisors, of course. Yeah, thank you for listening. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation, also very much and precisely on time. I would like now to open the opposition by giving the word to Professor Kirkham, who has a chair in developmental psychology at Birkbeck University.
Thank you.
Go ahead, you have the word.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I want to thank you for this really, really lovely presentation. Can you not hear me? Can you hear me okay? No. Can no one hear me? Let me try something else. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Thank you. I'll start again. Dear candidate, thank you so much for this lovely presentation and for a really, really wonderful set of studies. It was a pleasure to read. It is a pleasure to be here. So thank you. I have a couple of questions and I'd like to start with asking about experiment 1, please. There is a finding in your experiment 1 that good readers suffer more than poor readers in the loud condition. Could you posit some reasons for why this might be?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and for your questions. You referred to the results, then better readers actually seems to be more affected by the loudness of speech. This was an unexpected result. And what we thought it could happen there is that better readers are actually more able to master reading. And so when they are distracted by background speech, by auditory distraction in general, they are more able to slow down reading in order to preserve reading comprehension. So this was one hypothesis that we had. A second hypothesis is that loudness had a specific effect on the automaticity of reading processing. So better readers have more automatized reading skills, and following this, that their performance decreased more compared to less good readers that have less automaticity in their reading processes. So we had these two hypotheses explaining these unexpected results. This is actually in contradiction what the literature says that that children normally are more affected by speech, by background noise, because they have less good attentional skills, and also they master less the task, the skill that we are examining. In this case, it was reading. So this was really unexpected.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I expected it to go in the other direction as well, but sort of thinking about it for a while, it did occur to me that actually it's quite nice, this idea that perhaps if you're a really good reader, or if you're a poor reader, sorry, that you are so focused on trying, the cognitive load is so high, you're so focused that you can blank other things out. So I thought that was, I really liked that finding when I read it. Actually, just sort of following up on that, do you have any hypotheses of what might have happened if you'd had diagnosed dyslexic in that particular paradigm? Do you think it would have gone in exactly the same direction, or any differences?
So if we take into account these results, then yes. So if we assume that reading skills of dyslexic readers are less automatized, and they master less this skill, it's possible that they show this pattern where they are less affected, you know, because their reading is more effortful, as you said. So so it's possible that we see this result, but I also do think that things can be more complicated than we normally expect. So I'm also guessing whether the level of their attentional skills may play a role in this. So they might be more, you know, affected by background noise and less able to suppress distractions, and this also may play a role in the results.
That's perfect. I think if we learn anything doing our PhDs, is that everything is always more complicated than we think it's going to be. All right, my second question, or last question, is in experiments 2 and 3, there is quite a bit of cognitive load in the paradigm. So I'm a developmental psychologist. So given the large age range from a developmental perspective, when considering working memory, for example, what role do you think cognitive capacities and the development of them might have played in the results?
Yes, this is an interesting question. If I could go back, probably I would choose to restrict maybe the age range of our sample. That said, we have children from 7 to 12 years old, but the 7 and 12 years old were only, out of 100 kids that we tested, there were only like 2 or 3, and they were perfectly matched between the two groups. But still, I do agree that the age range was too broad, especially considering that 4 years are a lot in development for, for children. And it's possible, especially in the training task, the lattice speech and learning task, that working memory played a role there. So I think it would be really interesting to test this possibility and to see what is the weight, the influence of attentional skills and the one of working memory. So that would be an interesting an interesting follow-up of this study. Unfortunately, because we have a lot of measures, we couldn't extend further the testing sessions for these children.
Yeah, of course. I think working memory always plays such a big role in everything. So it's exciting to put it in, but obviously you had a lot going on. Well, thank you so much, esteemed candidate, for your answers. It was very excellent hearing them. So I will pass my questions on to the next opponent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to give the word to the next. We'll go to the next round in the opposition, and I give the word to Professor Kotz. He holds a chair. She holds a chair in neuropsychology and translational cognitive neuroscience.
Dear candidate, I also would like to extend my congratulations to a really excellent piece of work and a very clearly written dissertation. I also extend my congratulations to the supervisory team. This is an immense effort, testing children in that sample sizes. So really well done. I also enjoyed the clarity of your presentation. But as usual, some questions arise or remain. I want to start out with a bit more of a general question, and that is the use of attention. I mean, I'm quite intrigued by the possibility that attention plays such a distinct role in reading development. But intuitively, I would have opted for visual attention paradigms. So your choice was very distinctly in the auditory domain on the one hand, but you also test across different forms of attention in different experimental setups. What's the motivation behind that? Was that more driven by the tasks? Or do you make assumptions that these different forms of attentions all play one way or the other into the individual profiles of dyslexic readers in their development?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your compliments and your questions. Regarding the first part of your question, so why did you focus so much on auditory attention compared to visual attention? I understand your question, and I do not exclude, of course, the visual attention plays a role in reading acquisition and in reading. So there it was because we had to make a choice, and we have some motivations for that. So first, we wanted to understand whether auditory attention plays a role in speech and noise deficit, speech and noise perception deficit in dyslexic readers. So that's why auditory attention was the candidate to test that. And also we wanted to understand more about how auditory attention plays a role also in skills like phonological awareness and letter-speech sound learning. So there are previous studies showing actually that there are more when there are only a few studies doing that, but when they have both a visual and auditory paradigm, normally they found more deficit in the auditory modality than the visual modality, and this was more related than to their phonological skills or impairment. So this was the rationale for that. Regarding your second questions, so we used two different measures, so interference control and selective sustained attention, because both components could play a role in reading and also reading specific skills. The literature regarding interference control is much more limited. So that's also why we wanted to add in there. And we wanted to understand to try to get a better, more comprehensive understanding of which components of attention plays a role in reading. So that was the reason.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to continue with a couple of questions regarding chapter 3, and that is on the attention modulation of neural entrainment. Within that type of approach, people have a lot of discussions at the moment that we're talking about a very different form of attention when we stream auditory information. And that is called dynamic attending. So can I zoom into particular features in a specific way because they become relevant to me? Is that something that you had considered? Because then there would have potentially been different ways to think about analyzing your data. So you've chosen a very particular way of analyzing your EEG data. But what about frequency tagging and other forms of EEG analysis? So it's a twofold question with regards to the type of attention that you may expect to see here, and yeah, why you choose the type of analysis that you choose relative to something else that may have been more fitting to that type of conceptualization.
Yes, so we were particularly, we are specifically interested in these neural effects of attention when modulating task demands. So when asking specifically to direct attention. If I understand correctly, your question about dynamic attending, I think there the background is a bit different. So it's the theory according to which oscillatory endogenous oscillatory mechanism aligned to rhythmic presentation, and these serve as attentional functions. So the paradigm was specifically designed to test something different, so selective attending, so not just an alignment based on the rhythmic presentation of the stimuli, but also like a selective attention function. And so because of this, I look at the data in the way I did with this analysis. I chose channel-wise analysis because we didn't have a priori hypothesis about the location. And also we wanted to compare it to purely passive listening. So that was also the rationale of looking at 3 Hertz and 6 Hertz at the same time.
Mm-hmm. But if I had pushed you to say, think about it from a perspective of just analyzing the attended stream versus the unattended stream, you could have done different types of analysis, right? I mean, I understand your motivation. I'm trying to get at whether purely focusing on these higher levels of attention, which cognitive control is on the one hand, selective attention is on the other hand, would your results have looked differently? Because at the neural level, you say you don't find any distinct differentiation between dyslexic readers and non-dyslexic readers. So my question is the reason why you don't find these differences is because you focus attention on a task dimension rather than looking how the reader, quote unquote, focuses on the information that they have to process, so rather implicitly.
Mm-hmm. I understand your question, and probably I do agree with you. Maybe looking at the data in a different way. So not the focus of the analysis was showing the kind of proactive, voluntary direction of attention and sustain of attention over time, while a more implicit, more attentional capture component of attention could be impaired there in dyslexia readers. So this is possible, yes.
Can I prompt one last question? Given this very interesting dissociation between behavioral effects and the EEG effects, namely no differentiation at the group level versus behaviorally and task dependent, you see differences. Why did you choose a group comparison? Because I read a lot in your texts that it's all about individualization. And so I'm simply trying to figure whether a different form of statistics would have served the purpose better, like a mixed linear model, for example.
I actually, I'm not sure if I understood your question, because in the measure of attention, we actually find an alignment, in my opinion, between behavioral measures and EEG metrics, because in the EEG metrics, we find this soft trend, some electrode, and in the behavioral measure, the performance was in general lower, but again, there was no statistical significance there. So actually, I do think that they are aligned, the two metrics. And sorry, I missed the second part of your question.
But I mean, I'm simply going back to the statistics. At the group level, you don't find any differences.
It's
right?
true. The way we look at the individual difference, it was actually looking at the link, at the relationship between the attentional measures and reading skills. So individual different in these two domains.
Okay. I think that brings me to the end of my questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much also. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Brem, who holds the chair in cognitive neuroscience in childhood and adolescence at University of Zurich in Switzerland. You have the word.
Dear candidate, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. So, dear candidate, also from my side, my warm congratulations. It has been a very nice, excellent presentation and a very impressive set of studies with the kids. It's really excellent work, and it was a pleasure to read your thesis. So it's also a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I have a couple of questions, mainly related to your study 4. In your study 4, which I think is really an excellent design, you let children learn artificial symbol speech sound correspondences and looked at learning trajectories and in children with and without dyslexia, and also the relation to factors like attention, interference control, reading skills. Now, in that study, the children learned the correspondences between symbols and speech sound. And one question that always arises in such designs is actually the difference that you find between the groups in the learning trajectories. What is your opinion? Is it more related that the kids with dyslexia have more of a deficit in one of the modalities that they have to learn to integrate or associate, so probably mainly in the auditory phonological domain? Or do you think that it is really a problem in the binding procedure or the association procedure that you see in your experiment?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and your question. So I think it's a bit hard to just pick one of the two. I think both are possible. So it's possible both that their phonological difficulties, but as well as their difficulties in binding the audio, the phonological input and the new symbol play a role here. Yeah, so we were more interested in the binding process. They were already familiar with the speech sounds. So we could partially control for previous experience, and they were asked to learn to associate with these new symbols. So I do think that the difficulty there is probably more related to the binding component.
But still, I mean, your group shows phonological deficits, right? The dyslexic group, they have phonological deficits. It could still be that they just have a problem with accessing, or that they have weaker representations or other representations. So do you think that you can really say that it's the binding which is deficient, or yeah, is that clear from your design?
I haven't controlled for their phonological deficits, so I can't 100% say that those phonological deficits that they have, because we measured that they confound the result. So it's true that I cannot say with 100% certainty that it's a binding deficit.
Would you expect maybe if you would have used other sounds, not phonemes, non-linguistic sounds, would you have expected similar results or different results in your training paradigm?
I think, I'm just thinking of previous literature, and I think there the data are a bit contrasting. So if I remember correctly, there's a study showing that they use both the same paradigm with verbal stimuli and with non-speech stimuli, and they only found difficulties in the speech domain, while other type of paradigms they found in both. So I'm not, I think it's, and it would be something interesting to test, and I'm not sure. Maybe I expect not to find difficulties in if I would use other type of sounds.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe also one point, you tested school children who already have experience with real letter speech sound correspondences. Do you think that there is some interference with learning novel associations in these kids, and would you expect it? Would you expect different trajectories or also differences between children before they learn to read? So between at-risk children for dyslexia and children without risk, for example, or do you think it would be similar?
Understand if I can ask you again to repeat the part about the at-risk children.
Yeah, if you would go to the preschool age and do a similar task where they do not have already learned the letter speech sound correspondences, would you expect a similar deficiency in at-risk children as compared to children with no risk for dyslexia, or would you think that would be different? So could it be used as a screener for dyslexia risk?
I do think so. As I said during the presentation, that the idea was to mimic the first step of reading acquisition, but of course we could only partially control for previous exposure by using different symbols compared to regular real letters. So as you said, I do think that there might be an influence of previous exposure and their previous skills. Regarding age differences, we control for age in the analysis, so there was a way to control for that, but I do think that previous exposure could play a role there. And I think these type of paradigms have been, learning paradigms have been used in other studies, and they could be suitable for early screening in children at risk.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one last question which I had with regard to the relation of the sustained auditory selective attention with the learning paradigm. here also my question is it really the auditory attention that is crucial here, or is it rather just sustained attention that helps the children learning also these associations? So would it also generalize to other domains, visual, or what do you think here?
I think it's the effect there is more due to a more general attention, and perhaps it's not really specific to auditory. Of course, we will need to test also the visual modality to have a clear idea here. But I do think that the majority is due to kind of a sustained attention component. So having more general, also because we saw that both interference control and selective and sustained attention predicted. Of course, both they are in the auditory modality. But what I would like to say is that I think it's very possible that it's due to having general greater attentional skills, may not just specific the auditory domain. But we do also know that there's a spread sort of effect of attention. So being able to direct attention to the audio modality may support also the visual modality. So that's also this aspect to consider.
Dear candidate, thank you very much for your responses. I would like to give over.
Thank you very much. I would like now to pass the word to Professor Thierry, who holds a chair in cognitive neuroscience at Bangor University at the UK. You have the word.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Good. So, dear candidates, I would like to start with a little kind of feedback on the experience of reading your thesis. It was a privilege, actually, to read your thesis. I thought the work was beautifully written, extremely concise. I was very impressed by literature review, and to be honest, it's probably one of the best literature reviews I've read in my career. So I don't want to flatter you too much, but this was a very nice experience. And in fact, I wish my students could produce something as good quality as this on a regular basis. So apart from this, of course, and this has been already mentioned previously, the range of works and the kind of variety of experiments and the different facets that you've observed in your work is remarkable, and you've learned to use very many tools. Also, the range of statistical tools you've used is very impressive, and so I would like to congratulate you on this wonderful work, and also, of course, your supervisors who've led you and guided you very well in this work. So I have a few questions. One of the questions that I had that has been stolen from me, so I'll start down the list a bit, but it was very well answered anyway. I will start with a detailed question. In the entrainment experiment, so in chapter 3 experiment, how did you go about, it's a detailed question, but for me it's important from a methodological point of view. How did you go about choosing the frequency of presentation of the tones you used and their duration? And the reason why I'm asking this is because, of course, there are natural rhythms in the brain, and I'd like to know how you positioned your stimulus rate and the frequency in relation to these other frequencies that are naturally occurring in the brain, and why.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind compliments and for your questions. So regarding your question about the frequency, so the paradigm was developed previously in the lab and was used with adults. And there in the lab has been tested the optimal frequency that for adults was 4 and 8 hertz. And with children, we piloted the data and we saw that actually 3 hertz was the frequency that was more suitable and was giving us also better performance. The task was a bit difficult, of course, for children to perform. So having 3 hertz helped them performing in the task.
And can sorry, carry on.
Sorry. But if I understand correctly, your question was about the preferred frequency.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
if I'm correct, the range for children on preferred frequencies should be around 3-4 hertz as well. So I'm not sure if I have the wrong information.
That's fine. I wanted to know if it was based on pilot data indeed, or if you had basically based this on the literature, the existing literature. And one question that I was particularly wondering about is what would have happened, or if you had considered presenting the two melodies at different fundamental frequencies rather than similar ones.
And does your question, if I can ask, does your question refer specifically in the group comparison, so in differences between dyslexic and typical readers, or more a general effect?
No, a more general question is, like, you have two frequencies, you ask them to selectively attend to one particular melody presented at a 3 hertz frequency. And I'm wondering to what extent you could have the other melody presented at a different frequency, not, to make sure that you don't have any overlap in the activity bands between the two. Do you see what I mean? It's a more specific question, yeah.
Yes, I understand. I understand your question, but I'm not sure whether it was, so it would help us more disentangling what is the contribution of the suppressed target band, I suppose. So this
That's
could
exactly,
indeed give us what children have to do there was both to select the target band, but there was also a suppression component, right? They have to try to inhibit their attention towards the other band. So it's true that having different frequency probably would help us understanding what is the contribution of suppressing and also the effects of suppressing at the brain level.
Okay, well, that you've answered the question as I was hoping you would, so it's perfect. Okay, the second question I had was more theoretical, and I'm sorry, it's going to sound a bit wide range, but I'd like to know if you consider auditory attention as being really one thing. And we speak about auditory attention now. We generally specify sometimes sustained attention, selective attention, interference control. But I'd like to know what your view of auditory attention is as a global phenomenon. Is it really one label appropriate to describe it? And do you think, more importantly, that the different experiments that you've used really tap into all the sorts of dimensions, the properties of auditory attention?
If I understand correctly, so if I take the two tasks I've used to measure attention, I do think that also interference control may play a role in the other paradigm, what we call the selective sustained attention paradigm. And this I refer back to your other question. So there might be a suppression there. There's a need also to suppress the other band. So in this case, also interference control play a role in that task. So following this, then the labels are labels, and they don't capture the whole range of cognitive processes that the task tap into as well. So this is sorry, I have to ask you to repeat the last part of your question.
Well, I think you're well on your way to answer the question, in fact, because what I'm trying to get at is to what extent you could consider interference control as a form of attention itself, or as indexing a particular form of auditory attention. Auditory attention is about finding the target in your stream of information and selectively extracting it, but it's also pushing away, inhibiting other types of information. And I wanted to know if you think that the balance of looking at these two things, so you've demonstrated in chapter 3, you do cover that, but how do you think across the work, across the thesis, you have covered these different aspects of auditory attention, and are there some that you might not have covered?
Some that I haven't covered, I have to take a second to think about it. Well, I was thinking about the task that I use. Interference control was actually a very kind of the type of suppression required there was at quite a high level. So it was suppression of semantic information. So what it hasn't been looked in my work, I think, is another type of suppression, which is the suppression of more perceptual information. So this is one aspect that I haven't taken into account there.
Very good answer, in my opinion. Yes. So that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, actually. It's the difference between basically bottom-up processes of attention filtering and top-down. And so depending on the level of complexity you're targeting, you need to distinguish the different types of attention. And of course, in language is fundamental. So you got exactly where I was hoping you would get. So, and finally, my third question, hoping I'm not dragging too long, is quite speculative and speculative. So don't worry too much about the accuracy of the answer. It's just to ask you, do you think we can really distinguish between impairments that apply at the time of learning, that is impairments that are important in the process of acquiring information and learning a skill, for example, reading, from those that apply later in life and into adulthood? So after the brain plastically has evolved and changed cognitively. So in other words, we test children, but we already know that they're dyslexic, right? Because they've been diagnosed. But to what extent what we see at that stage of learning, already having developed some knowledge of reading and language, is actually masking the true source of the deficit, which applied during learning in much earlier stages? Do you understand my question?
Yeah. So if I understood correctly, you mean that like we look at children where they already are diagnosed with dyslexia, so it might be already too late because we are looking at a later stage and we don't look what happened before.
Exactly.
So I do agree with you that actually the ideal study, I think it would be to start much early when we want to identify what's happening before they start learning. So testing, for example, children that are genetically at risk for dyslexia now that there are not, and see the skills, like which are the skills that are impaired, which processes are impaired. And in this way, we can also more causally say that attention had a specific influence on their reading skills and on their reading acquisition. So for example, the paradigm when we asked children to learn this audiovisual association, of course, it was a kind of sort of prototype of what's happening when they start learning to read, but it's already, when we test them, when we assess their skills, is already quite later on. And a lot of things may have already happened. So I do understand your point.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to pass the floor. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you. Now we will continue by giving the word to Dr. Jonkman, who is an associate professor here at Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience at our university. You have the word.
Thank you. Also, my congratulations with this solid piece of work. I must say, I enjoyed very much reading your elaborate review in the introduction. Also, this very nice table, which gave me an overview immediately of the attention deficits that are there, all reported in dyslexia. Attention being my field, but dyslexia not so much so. So that was very nice to read. And I see a lot of overlap in some studies we do and you do, but then in the language field with attention. But also I like the approach of the different, like a training study and doing an intervention study. So also looking a little bit more broadly than only doing little experimental manipulations. So that was appreciated a lot. I wanted to discuss some things that I read in the chapter 4 about the artificial symbol learning paradigm. I was a little bit confused, but in the text I read about
the congruency. I want to talk first about the congruency effect, so the match-mismatch effect in this task. This was the only task in which you found some differences between dyslexics and typical readers, in the overall sense that they had overall lower accuracy, right? But in the regarding reaction time, you say in the discussion and in the results text that they that in general the congruency effects and mismatch, that mismatch incongruent trials are processed better, right? More accurate. But you say it's also slower. But in the table at page 185, the reaction times for the non-matching trials are actually lower, so faster. Yeah. So I don't know if it's. So I'm talking about table 4.3, page 185. The reaction times in the non-matching trials are lower than the matching, so they would be faster. Also, actually, not slower.
So non-matching,
The reaction times. But yeah, so there's a mismatch between what's in the text and what's in the table. But it doesn't matter so much. Yeah, it would mean that if it's also faster, then it's on both aspects, it's better in the non-matching, right? So they have a higher accuracy in general, both groups of children,
both groups, yes.
and faster. Yeah. But yeah, let's so assume that they are, but also if it's more accurate, it doesn't matter so much. My point is that in normal incongruency tasks like Stroop or Flenker, with known stimuli, semantically known stimuli, you always find the opposite. You find that incongruent trials elicit more errors and slower reaction times. And now it's completely the opposite. But this is a learning paradigm. It's different from. So you learn new stimuli that are unknown. So can you elaborate a little bit why you think this difference between these faster, better responses to incongruent trials than congruent are resulting from? What do they say about learning and the associations they? Can they say something about it?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at to refresh my memory about it. I'm looking at the plot in page 186. So they are more accurate when they are non-matching, and it's true is in opposition what we find in I haven't thought of it in the normal congruent paradigm. Yeah. So what I thought there is that they basically during learning they're focusing on reading of the matchy, the two correspondences, the match, and so they're able already to kind of more fast and more accurately discard what is not the matching pair that is presenting. Unfortunately, I'm not confident with the literature about learning paradigms and this type of incongruence effect. So I suppose it's a learning effect where the mechanisms are different and they are trying to focus in on different aspects. And this is quite different when you present, for example, also we had the auditory Stroop task where they were already very familiar with the stimuli.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I wondered because yeah, we also did some learning paradigm in another aspect with numbers. But I wondered because performance is not 100%, right? It's still in this task, it's about 75%. So might it be that it's more still the associations are not exact one-to-one correspondence yet, but a little bit noisy still, so that it's easy to say, okay, this is not it, but it's very difficult to say, yes, this is the match.
You're right.
And that's why it's better in the non-match now. Yeah.
So yes, this was the hypothesis I had that during learning is different. That's what they tend to do. So they're more able to exclude already what's the wrong one, but the right one they are still uncertain. Also, the paradigm was really short compared to other training tasks. So what we're measuring there is like after really few trials. So
Yeah, so it would be different when they are, it's not overlearned, when they would reach the 100%, right? Yeah.
yes, it would be interesting having perhaps like a much longer paradigm, and then maybe we could already see if it's different what we observed in the first part of the training with the second part of the training.
Yeah, it was a little bit disappointing in this sense that you excluded this factor completely from the analysis because of no differences between the two groups. But I would have been interested to see it interact with time on task, for instance, the block thing you did, because that can give you answers to what happened maybe there in the learning phase. Another short question. You have also, you did not find any differences between the groups in the reading task with artificial symbols. And I looked at the appendix and it looked really difficult for children to do this task actually, with these strange symbols and reading out loud. And I saw in the table that it's also really only 5 or 4 words that they could correctly read within 1 minute. And I looked back because I'm not familiar with this reading fluency task. In chapter 3, it was about 29 or something with a normal word. So it's a big difference. Could this be affecting your findings that it was so low? The absence of.
So it's true that we find differences in the two groups in the task, but not in the reading paradigm. And actually in the reading paradigm, actually we saw even more differences among children in how they performed. There were children that could read actually 14 reads out of 14, so they were incredible. And some children that actually can only recognize 1 or 2 of them. What I think happened is that because of what I said before, we have a very short training task, and then children that didn't know that they have to do this reading task and they were presented with it. So it's possible that giving them more time during the training, that would have, what I think is that it could have changed the results afterwards. So maybe we would have not seen so many differences at the end of the training between the two groups, but then we would have seen them in the reading task. And we would also have a less noisy measure, possibly.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you.
Giada Guerra, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense, and I request that you and your company remain here until we return to this room.
darstellt.
Giada Guerra. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Bonte is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible? I will. By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Giada Guerra, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
And now there will be congratulatory words by your promoter.
Thank you. Dear Giada, Dr. Guerra, also on behalf of Fred and Adam, Jurgen and Aniek, congratulations with this great achievement. Many congratulations also to Max. E tantissimi auguri anche ai tuoi genitori, tua sorella e la nonna. Potete essere molto fieri della vostra bravissima dottoressa Guerra. Giada, your journey with us started in spring 2017, when we interviewed you as one of the PhD candidates for our Interlearn project. I checked back our scoring forms, and they said things like motivated, excellent social skills, relevant experience, and a good fit with both the RID eval, because it was still also eval then, and academic settings. And independently of each other, we all ranked you first. And actually, we were quite stressed about the rankings of the other projects because we didn't want to lose you. And happily enough, that didn't happen. So we were super happy that you started with us then in September 2017. You were directly thrown into the deep end with full immersion type of meetings. First one with our team in Amsterdam, where we shared a very nice Airbnb together. And then with all 5 Interlearn teams in London. And during these meetings, your supervisory team noticed that your facial expressions slowly started to radiate like increasing levels of stress. And so the team got together and decided that it was time for me to mobilize my motherly skills and write you a reassuring email.
Please talk into the microphone.
Oh, yeah. And so I did. And your reply was actually clairvoyant because it said, now I'm working on the feeling, trying to transform it into productive learning. And as we all saw today, you clearly achieved this goal. Your PhD project was challenging in multiple ways. So it involved traveling between London, Maastricht, and Amsterdam. And together with Noot and assistants, you designed an impressive number of paradigms. You collected behavioral data in 113 children, 106 of whom also performed your EEG study, and 53 of whom you followed during dyslexia intervention. And this great success undoubtedly had to do also with the cartoon, like the cartoon version of Giada that was on the lab door, and that was saying, wetenschap en plezier gebeurt hier. Literally meaning, science and pleasure happen here. And this cartoon really had also Giada glasses and everything, right? So that undoubtedly really contributed to the success. But then again, a lot of these transformations of stress into productive learning had to happen during the analysis of this huge amount of data. Because these data are noisy, children don't always do what you expect. And you approach this with an astonishing amount of detailed analysis that you would throw at us, combined with an authentic feeling for expressive drama. And witnessing one of your moments of desperation, your office mate Andreas actually told you you're not your data, Giada, which then became your central mantra throughout the PhD project and led you very successfully through your data jungle and to your impressive thesis. And in the meantime, actually a side project with 63 school children was transformed into a highly successful publication on children's reading in noise. And it actually receives lots of attention because it has been receiving like 410 mentions on Twitter across the globe, and especially in South America, apparently, which makes it the paper that got most attention of all papers in its journal, Mind, Brain and Education, and puts it into the top 5 of all research output scored by Altimetric, that basically scores all this social media and other types of attention on the internet for scientific work. So it's super successful. But now, okay, so let's first now actually talk about Giada from a personal point of view also a bit, right? So as a real Italian, food, of course, is top priority. And among your peers, you're famous for setting up like a full lunch buffet, including always a good bottle of Italian wine. Sorry, no, that is me. Sorry. A good bottle of Italian olive oil. Sorry. Accompanied by complaints about the bland Dutch olive oil that is completely without any taste. So you also love to go for hikes. And apparently, when you come across sheep, you always stop to bleat at them in the hope of one of them in the hope of them accepting you as one of them. And so I heard, at least. So please feel free to also invite us on your next hike. And then maybe we can actually join in somewhere in London or Germany or Italy. Dear Giada, on behalf of the whole team, I wish you the very, very best for your future, both personally and work-wise. We very much enjoyed working with you and are super proud of you. Congratulations again, and don't forget to drink some real good Prosecco to celebrate tonight. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
So dear Dr. Giada Guerra, first of all, I have to convey the congratulations on behalf of the Board of Deans of our faculty and our university. But I also would like to personally congratulate you for what is clearly a beautiful thesis and an excellent defense. And I would also like to involve your family and all who is dear to you in this congratulations, because of course you have done an excellent job, but you don't ever do this completely alone. So I'm sure that many people were behind you and they deserve to share in this moment and to share these congratulations with you. So with this, I will close this academic session, and I have some household little things to say. First of all, there will be some reception. So I will ask everybody who wants to have some bites to eat and some little drinks to go to the refter. But at the same time, I would like to ask those who want to take pictures of you and your supervisory team, if there is a photographer doing this job,